The Lost Seasons tells the story of our family's journey with a pediatric neuro-immune disorder. If you believe your child may be suffering from one of these shadow syndromes, one of the many inflammation-based immune disorders so prevalent today, our story will give you hope. We've created this companion video to increase awareness and to decrease the stigmas and misunderstanding that children and families so often face. Neuroimmune disorders are devastating, and one of the worst things about them is that they often occur out of nowhere. A child can be perfectly well one day and completely disabled with neurological, sensory, behavioral, and even psychiatric symptoms the next. For the children who suffer from these disorders, there appears to be a breach in their blood-brain barriers, and germs that should stay in the bloodstream cross into the brain. In the case of our son, he experiences a breakdown in his blood-brain barrier when he gets strep throat. When he contracts this bacterial infection, a common childhood illness that results in a slight fever and a few days of rest for most children, can take away our son's ability to walk. This is him following a case of strep throat in 2014. Sudden onset motor symptoms were the thing that everyone around us noticed, but what they couldn't see was the damage that this single infection was doing to his brain and his nervous system. He's endured years of sensory, neurological, cognitive, and psycho-behavioral symptoms that were left behind from this single infection. In the last 5 years, he's had dozens of breakthroughs and setbacks, and we've traveled thousands of miles for care because there isn't any available in our home state. All of this for an illness that few around us understand. The toll that all of this takes on children and families is immense. This is our son wearing number 11 at a national soccer tournament and thriving. His return to health has been possible only because of the treatment that he's received at one of the few dedicated treatment programs available in this country today. Education and resources are scarce, and because of this, the misdiagnosis rates are high, and the suffering that children and families face is enormous. This has to change because these disorders, they're not rare. Researchers estimate that as many as 1 in every 200 children may suffer from a neuroimmune disorder, but most of them will be diagnosed and treated for something entirely different. Treatment outcomes improve dramatically with early diagnosis, and if more children can receive treatment in a timely manner, the future becomes brighter for all of us. We know that our family is among the lucky few who've had access to a dedicated treatment program for our child, and we want to do our part to make sure that other children have the same chance. That is why we've shared our story in this book, and this is why we donate a portion from every book that is sold to the PANS Research and Treatment Program at Stanford, so that these world-class doctors who have given us our world back can do the same thing for families like you. As science works to understand these disorders, the rest of us can do our part by educating ourselves and others. Read the book and share the companion video. Help educate others about this topic. Family members, child care providers, teachers, school counselors, medical professionals, therapists, neighbors, coaches, ministers, anyone and everyone, because when one of our kids wins, we all win. And these dark, isolated paths that so many of us have had to walk can turn into journeys of healing for all of us. Because together, we can shine light on these shadow syndromes, and we can find ways to walk together into the light of day. I'm an Anymom, and I've written a book called The Lost Seasons, about our experience with an inflammatory brain disorder called PANS. This companion course is to supplement the book. It's meant to act as a resource for parents, teachers, coaches, and family members of children facing inflammatory brain conditions. Whatever your reason or your role for being here, welcome to the Lost Seasons Companion Course. Before we explore our topic, let's get familiar with some definitions. First, what's with this any vernacular? Well, to begin with, when your child is living with a biological disorder that is often perceived by others to be caused by a psychiatric illness, bad parenting, or just being a plain old bad kid, it's painful. When life was handing out free childhood, inflammatory brain disorders, nobody wanted one. When the call goes out that one of these disorders is up for the taking, no one raises their hand and says, "Yes, please, give my child one of those." Instead, we get handed these disorders, sometimes in the middle of the night, and the child that we knew the day before is gone, and we wake up in a whole new, dark world, and no one around us understands it. Sharing the truth of our world isn't easy, and for a lot of us, we avoid it for as long as we can, and we share it only when we must. I wrote The Lost Seasons anonymously for this same reason, and I wrote our story in a way to imply that our any child, he could be any child, and that our family really could be any family. We really could be any family, and any parent can find themselves tumbling down the rabbit hole that these illnesses take us to. For the purpose of this course, a shadow syndrome is any pediatric neuro-inflammatory condition that doesn't fit neatly into any of the old paradigm containers of pediatric health syndromes. Things like Asperger's, autoimmune encephalopathy, and sensory processing disorder were unknown to parents 20 years ago. But today, they've become a regular part of the conversation for millions of us. These emerging disorders, these shadow syndromes, often appear to have inflammation and immune dysregulation at their core. And now the definitions for PANS and PANDAS. PANS, or Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome, is a clinical diagnosis given to children who have a dramatic, sometimes overnight, onset of neuropsychiatric symptoms, including obsessions, compulsions, or food restriction. They're often diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder or an eating disorder. But the sudden onset of symptoms separates PANS from these disorders. In addition, they may have symptoms of depression, irritability, anxiety, and difficulty with schoolwork. The cause of PANS is unknown in most cases, but is thought to be triggered by infections, metabolic disturbances, and other inflammatory reactions. And as with PANS, children with pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with streptococcal infections, or PANDAS, also have an acute onset within 2 to 3 days of neuropsychiatric symptoms, specifically OCD or tics. However, PANDAS patients test positive for a recent streptococcal infection, such as strep throat, perianal strep, or scarlet fever. Like PANS patients, they may also suffer from uncontrollable emotions, irritability, anxiety, and loss of academic ability and handwriting skills. Although PANDAS was identified as a medical syndrome more than a decade before PANS, it has been classified as a subset of PANS to date. PANDAS is the only known subset of PANS, but more causes may be discovered in the future. PANS and PANDAS are just two manifestations of a larger group known as neuro-immune disorders, which are a group of illnesses that are the result of acquired dysregulation of both the immune system and the nervous system, which can result in chronic illness and even disability. For children and families who find themselves in the midst of one of these disorders, life can get very dark very fast, and it's astonishing how quickly we can lose our parental footing. For most of us, when our children get sick, we know what to do. Lukewarm baths for a high fever, a steamy shower for croup, Benadryl for allergies. But from the get-go, there's nothing ordinary about a neuroimmune disorder. The early search for reasons for why whatever has happened to your child is happening usually runs the gamut from thinking the child could just be in a bad phase to blaming it on an ear infection, a toothache, or even just being a picky eater. Parents are perplexed. Kids are suffering. Teachers are disciplining, and other family members may be judging. Often medical professionals are either not really looking away, or looking in all the wrong directions, because neuroimmune disorders are not ordinary, and all of the usual toeholds that a parent, a doctor, a teacher, really anyone knows to cling to in a garden variety childhood illness do nothing at all to stave off the free fall that happens when you enter into the world of a pediatric neuroimmune disorder. For most families, the onset of these disorders is harrowing because it feels like out of nowhere, the child that you knew the day before has disappeared and been replaced by one that you don't even recognize. And although few of us realize it, at the time of onset, we've just entered the ring with a formidable opponent, and the acute onset is just the first blow that will be landed in a very long and a very unfair fight. Onset is different for every family, but the crystalline way that an onset becomes burned into a family's memory seems almost standard. When you hear an Anyfamily describe their child's onset, there's a haunting familiarity to the stories that they tell. I felt like someone had kidnapped my child and left a body double in her place overnight. My sweet boy became a monster that I didn't even recognize. I was afraid to be alone with my own child. I didn't know what was happening, and I feel so guilty now for punishing him. When these disorders take hold, a child is quickly catapulted to a place that no one has a map for, and it's not just the child who is affected. These neuroimmune disorders move like a vapor through the entire family system. Marriages are often taxed when parents who are used to presenting a united front begin to argue and disagree about what might be happening and what to do next. Siblings find their needs overshadowed by the sudden crisis that is happening and may act out or become jealous. Leaving your child with a child care provider becomes difficult due to the erratic behaviors and unpredictable actions that your child is suddenly displaying. Separation anxiety may be so bad that a child refuses to go to school. And if you can get them to school, teachers are coming down hard because a child that was capable of writing a 4-page essay last week is suddenly unable to write even a simple sentence this week. And the teacher thinks that this is a choice that the child is making, not an illness that the child is suffering from. Grandparents and other family members who see only a small part of what is happening inside the home might weigh in with unwanted opinions about discipline, bedtime routines, and the myriad of other things that you no longer seem to have control of in your world. When we become the parent of an any child, we gain entrance to an exclusive club that no one wants to belong to. But once you realize that you're in, the membership does have a few perks. Because the any parents who have come before, they have left a trail of helpful tools and tips for those who are new to the journey. Private Facebook pages, advocacy groups, and entire organizations have popped up worldwide to support families and children facing a neuroimmune disorder. And while there are more and more clinicians becoming familiar with these disorders, oftentimes a parent searching the internet reaches the conclusion that their child is suffering from one of these disorders long before anyone in the medical field ever mentions it. Before looking in the direction of a neuroimmune disorder, many clinicians are likely to look toward things such as ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, or even early-onset schizophrenia. When this happens, an informed parent's best approach is to share what you've learned about neuroimmune disorders with your medical and treatment team. If you feel that PANS is being overlooked as a diagnosis, work collaboratively with your medical team and help to educate them about why you have these concerns, Offer to send a link to this video course. Loan them a copy of your book. Refer them to reputable organizations such as the Pandas Physicians Network. Encourage them to explore the continuing medical education programs offered through the Foundation for Children with Neuro-Immune Disorders, and remind them that PANS is estimated to affect as many as 1 in every 200 children. Also remind them that it has been researched and successfully treated by experts from Stanford, Yale, Georgetown, Harvard, Columbia, and the University of Arizona. If you are a teacher or a school counselor, here are some important things to know, because PANS is typically a school-age child disorder. The classroom environment can become a particularly painful place when a child is spiraling downward academically as well as behaviorally, and there isn't a clear understanding between parents and the school staff as to why this is happening. PANS-related behavioral and sensory symptoms that may be seen in the classroom include things like skin picking, vocal tics, unusual body postures, increased requests to go to the bathroom, sudden isolation from peers, atypical blinking, atypical coughing, throat clearing or sniffling, and the avoidance of eye contact. PANS-related cognitive changes can include things like difficulty with transitions, poor concentration, intrusive and repetitive questioning, perfectionism and poor frustration tolerance, refusal to carry out classroom instructions, inability to stop an activity when told to do so, poor time management, high distractibility, poor sense of sequencing, noticeable decreases in concentration, inability to multitask, and visual processing difficulties. The visual issues can cause them to require more time to read letters and numbers, create a profound and sudden deterioration in handwriting and math skills, and a variety of other things, too many to list here. A child can quite literally be at the top of their class one day and in need of special accommodations the next. Frequent and clear communication with parents is a must, but you may find that parents are reticent to come to you with their concerns. Take into account that PANS families face opposition and pushback at so many junctures in their lives that the flying under the radar approach that we discussed earlier really can become their default at times. You may find PANS parents difficult to deal with, and they may even seem like part of the problem. Bear in mind that these are parents who are exhausted and they're out of sorts themselves. They become unsure of their own judgment, which can make them seem indecisive. You may notice that parents exhibit a push-pull response to their child's academic ups and downs. They may seem overly concerned one day and underreactive the next. This lack of continuity is ushered in by the chronic unpredictability of this illness and the ongoing burden of feeling like they don't know if they're coming or going. If you have an identified PANS child in your classroom, you, as a teacher or school counselor, are just as likely as a mom or dad to be the one to identify that the child is starting to flare. Sometimes it's harder for parents to catch the downside than it is for those on the perimeter. Because parents are in it 24/7 with their children, they sometimes don't catch the changes that a teacher might be able to see more objectively through things like the gradebook or behavior reports. Physical markers that you can watch for in PANS students that may indicate an active flare or a decline in functioning can include becoming more fidgety or physically active than usual, tapping, drumming, leg bouncing, non-stop doodling, a noticeable lack of grooming. Sudden onset sensory issues can make activities such as teeth brushing, hair combing, or even nail trimming excruciating for a PANS child, and you may see the evidence of this. You may notice that they look disheveled or that they physically just seem off. Emotional changes that you might see include an ability to make decisions, concentrate or pay attention for even short periods of time, unprovoked mood swings that range from inappropriate giddiness to weeping, panic or excessive anxiety, overreaction to changes in their routine, verbal or physical aggression, regression of coping skills, and, of course, obsessive-compulsive behaviors, both in the classic sense and in more subtle ways, such as repetitive questioning, excessive use of paper, erasers, and continued undoing or redoing of their work. You may notice excessive touching of items or other children, checking behaviors, checking their backpack, checking their lunch bag, making sure their locker is shut. There may be changes that you can observe in a child's executive function and their working memory. Things such as poor time management, lost homework, homework that is brought to school but left in the desk, poor task completion or planning, and poor organization. You may notice a messy backpack, messy locker, and messy desk, multiple lost items and difficulty planning for class transitions. A child in a flare may display an inability to calculate timing, what supplies are needed, difficulty in their ability to get on time from one class to the next, and a noticeable decrease in their ability to multitask. Now, most of these signs and symptoms of a PANS flare overlap with very typical ebbs and flows of childhood behaviors, so it's important to note that it's the suddenness of the shifts and the severity of them that sets a neuro-immune flare apart from typical childhood behaviors. Auditory issues are common in flares as well. They cannot hear because they have the sensation of wind or rushing water in their ears. This can be mistaken for defiance or ignoring commands. A flare can also show up in the opposite way with an oversensitivity to sound. This can relate to loud noises such as a motorcycle or a lawnmower, or conversely, they can become reactive and very sensitive to small noises such as pencils writing, someone sniffling, or papers crinkling. You may see changes in both gross and fine motor skills. They can become more accident-prone and clumsy, as well as having difficulty with fine skills such as handwriting or holding a pencil properly. Changes to eating habits are also a sign of a flare. Food refusal is common. Anyfamilies learn early on that the best way to make it through the storms that a neuroimmune disorder brings is to have support and understanding from the systems around us, particularly medical, social, and familial systems. The prior section of this course touched on the educational system. This next section is for mental health practitioners, social workers, allied health professionals, friends, family, neighbors, coaches, anyone who may find themselves in the orbit of a PANS family. The information shared here is presented by me, but each snippet has been gleaned from real interactions and insight from the families who live day in and day out with these disorders. My voice represents the voice of many and the rainfall you hear in the background. It's there as a reminder because living with PANS really is like living with the sound of a storm lurking just over the horizon. You know it's there, and you know it could either move in or dissipate at any moment, and living in the mystery and the anxiety of that is part of the everyday experience of a PANS family. It's not an easy path, but as the following quote reminds us, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person that walked in. That's what the storm is all about. One of the most difficult and prevalent symptoms of PANS is separation anxiety. The anxieties that suddenly overwhelm these children can be disabling, and this takes its toll on both the children and the parents. From the outside, this could be easily misinterpreted and may just look like typical anxious behavior. However, nothing could be further from the truth. Now, we've all seen anxious children who may not want to be dropped off at daycare or school. PANS-related separation anxiety is not this. These children are having a neuro-inflammatory brain response. The onset is acute, And the fear of separation, usually from their primary caregiver, is deep and complex. The fear that we witness in our children is heartbreaking at our any child's onset. His fear of being out of our line of vision at all was so great that he would, for hours at a time, stay in conversation with us, just so that he could auditorily place us in time and space. Imagine spending all day long not only listening to your 5-year-old say, "Hi, Mama, hi, Mama, hi, Mama," but also having to echo back to them for hours, "Hi, sweetie, hi, sweetie, hi, sweetie." These repetitive checking behaviors can continue for days and sometimes weeks on end. When people wonder why any families don't share the intricacies of our experiences with our friends, our neighbors, our curious family members, this small example is a great starting point to help others understand why Pan's families can become so evasive about what's happening in our homes. Flying under the social radar is what most any families prefer. But, of course, staying under the radar is not always possible. Beyond the front doors of our any homes is where bits and pieces of the truth start to spill out. Others begin to notice school misbehavior, academic decline, sudden rifts with friends or peer groups, an inability to maintain normal activities such as sports, music lessons, or social clubs. One of the choices that any families so often face is whether to inform others about our plight proactively or to back into the truth after the storm that is Pan's has thrown normal around like dry leaves in a hurricane. There are advantages and disadvantages to both approaches. If we stay quiet and say nothing, there's always that outside chance that a flare will be averted, and that our any child's math teacher will never see his arithmetic skills plummet, or that our any child will make it through those piano lessons and even the spring recital without a bout of strep throat stepping in to usher in a raucous cacophony of misbehavior and chaos in our little maestro. We may get lucky and be able to avert sharing the truth of Pan's with the mainstays in our child's life every so often. But most of us learn that the don't ask, don't tell approach is not a luxury to be counted on. The downside to keeping the truth of a neuro-immune disorder quiet until a flare occurs is obvious. When there is no premise set for the nature of this illness, and a seemingly normal child begins to flare and changes markedly overnight, the truth is very hard to sell. Most often, people simply think we are trying to make excuses for our children. The ways that sudden behavior changes are likely to be misinterpreted by teachers, coaches, and other authority figures is predictable. An example from our life occurred when our any child was in 2nd grade. He had started the school year on a high note, and we were mistakenly optimistic that life was going to stay there, so we said nothing to his new teacher. Any child filed in the door of 2nd grade, just like all the other kids, and we smiled and we said nothing, willing ourselves to trust that it was going to remain this way. After spending the first few months of the school year in the glow of this short-lived Pan's remission, in a matter of hours, it all unraveled somewhere between the 8 a.m. drop-off and the 3 p.m. pickup. Just like you would see in a good suspense thriller, it was like Pan's had snagged one black suitcase and replaced it with another. The black suitcase that was left, of course, was our flaring Pan's child. By the end of that day, our any child had been disciplined, sent to detention, and moved to another teacher's classroom because the teacher that we had said nothing to believed that he was nothing less than awful. Despite having a conference with the teacher, a meeting with the principal, and bringing all of the medical documentation to the meeting, we paid dearly for the choice we made to forego sharing about Pan's at the beginning of the year. Despite all of the explaining and backtracking we did, the damage had been done. No one called us liars, but there were no accommodations being made, not even a little bit of empathy being offered, and within 2 weeks, we transferred to a different school. Call it a teachable moment, because we've never made that mistake with teachers again. It took us years to find our voice, to proactively communicate the truth of our any child's diagnosis with those who spend time with them, and in large part, our bravery has been ushered in by the copious amounts of documentation that our doctors at Stanford have provided us with. This has given our any child's illness instant legitimacy among those who may otherwise doubt us. We also have never been afraid to use the video of our son being unable to walk due to this disorder. When we explain to people that what this inflammatory brain disorder did to his legs is the same thing that it does to his brain and his nervous system, it allows an instant understanding. We know that we are among the lucky few that have a medical team to back us up with documentation, as well as visual compelling evidence for the reality of this immune disorder that lives within our son's body. Our good fortune and the heaviness of knowing that so many thousands of other families don't share this good fortune is in large part what has prompted us to share our story in this book and to offer this educational course. We're hoping that it will seem logical to others who read the book, The Lost Seasons, that if there is one any child out there, there are likely many, many others. And if this does not seem logical at first glance, perhaps our story will entice them to at least look further, to read other books about neuro-immune disorders, to look at the abundance of journal articles that are being published on this topic, and to take into consideration a number of reputable teaching hospitals spending hundreds of thousands of research dollars on bettering the understanding of these disorders. If you are a teacher listening to this course, here are some things that Anyfamilies want you to know. An immune response in my child may look like this, like sudden onset hyperactivity or ADHD, like lack of motivation, like feigned confusion, an inability to understand today what was perfectly understood yesterday, like academic decline due to laziness or an unwillingness to even try, like being difficult on purpose. And if you're a mental health professional listening to this course, here are some things that Anyfamilies want you to know. If we tell you that our child really wasn't like this last week and they seem devastatingly mentally ill this week, hear us out and invest time into us. Take a front row seat because we're inviting you in. Watch how this illness unfolds for our family and for our child. If we seem defensive and overly distraught, it's because we are. This illness has taken us to the mat, and we have made it as far as we have, largely on our own. If our story seems hard to fathom, please take into account that we have come to you for help. We are not here because we're in denial, or we want to make excuses for our child. We're struggling, and we need help. Listen to our story. Give us solutions to try. Just don't put us in a box of ordinary child mental health disorders, because that isn't what our child has. And we've come to this realization not because we wanted to, but because we've had to. What Anyfamilies want pediatricians to know. When we make our way to your office, it's not because we are being reactive. It's because we were too afraid to not bring our child to you. But we are equally as afraid to be here. We have learned to tiptoe through a medical world that usually doesn't have time to hear us out. If there had been a routine and a quick fix for our child, we would have taken it months ago, sometimes years ago. We are exhausted, mentally, emotionally, and financially. We are wary of medical care, caught between sharing everything that we've already learned about the disorder our child suffers from and sitting stone silent when you assess our child and begin to formulate a diagnosis based on a typical childhood illness that likely doesn't apply to our child. We are defensive because at the last doctor we visited, we may have been ridiculed because they did not believe that PANS or neuroimmune disorders are real. We may have been asked in frustration, if what we want is a sick child, because we seem insistent that our child is very ill when you may not agree. We may have even been referred to Child Protective Services because of our unwillingness to accept the diagnosis that was given to us somewhere else. Often, these diagnoses include disorders such as schizophrenia, anorexia nervosa, oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar disorder, or Tourette's syndrome. And please at least consider that even though all of these aforementioned disorders are commonly seen in childhood, that what we are telling you is that our child's current symptom set emerged along with an immune response to something else, whether it be strep throat, influenza, or some other known or even unknown pathogen. What we so desperately want doctors to hear is that our child's neuropsychiatric symptoms follow a sawtooth pattern based on his or her immune response. If you are an extended family member, a neighbor, or part of a PANS child's social system, what Anyfamilies want you to know is that if we seem reactive and overprotective, it's because we've had our world turn on a dime time and time again, and this can make it hard to relax into the what-ifs that childhood brings, because things can change so quickly in our world. What is a sniffle and a cough in your world can become a months-long nightmare in ours. What we want you to know, but probably don't have the courage to tell you, is that these illnesses do not just happen to our children, they happen to our whole family system. We lose friendships, we isolate extended family members, and we shutter up our lives so that no one can see inside. We become anxious and distraught and unbearably uptight about the details of our children's lives. What may look like helicopter parenting to you feels like survival to us. We see the eye rolls and we hear the whispers, and this makes us both ashamed and angry. What most people don't know is that we have second-guessed ourselves as parents more times than we can count. We have worried relentlessly that somewhere on the way to where we have arrived, that we as parents took a wrong turn, and this is all our fault. We watch our kids fight battles that we can't help them with, and we don't seem to be able to find other soldiers to get out on the field with them. We run up against brick walls, medically, psychologically, and socially. Navigating through these disorders can feel like being stuck in a funhouse where things shift and bend in ways that we never thought was possible. Our confidence is shot. Most days end with the hope that tomorrow will be better and the anxiety that perhaps it will not. Whole family post-traumatic stress disorder is a thing, and something as simple as a teacher telling us that our any child had a bad day at school can cause the vivid memory of past flares to wrap around our sensibility like saran wrap around last night's leftover dinner. There is irony to all of this because the anxiety, the depression, the disordered eating, the neuroimmune systems that form the basis for this disorder, in a PANS child, these symptoms are not any different than they are for anyone else. It's simply the cause of the symptoms that is so very different. Imagine, if you will, that anxiety was a contagious disease. Imagine that your child could catch an eating disorder if they were exposed to one, or that a bout of bipolar was going around the classroom the same way that the flu does. These notions that are nothing more than fictional to most people are very real to PANS families. One of the most difficult things about PANS and neuroimmune disorders as a whole is the fact that they are so complex and unpredictable. These illnesses follow many patterns, but they also create unexpected twists and turns that make their diagnosis and understanding difficult. You may be listening to these words and watching this video because an Anyfamily has shared it with you. If that's the case, please know that they have done everything they can to protect their child's privacy and to avoid the labels that can come from uninformed outsiders. If they have shared their truth with you now as part of the education that this video offers, Honor that, because this is an invitation to ask questions and to learn more about a journey that tens of thousands of children and families are walking today.